Here they come. Here they come. They're coming back. Aloha everybody, Sean at Aloha Pigeons, and today will be the 2018 Youngbird's second attempt at crossing the channel from the island of Molokai to the island of Oahu. Back in Molokai at the same release spot we were at about a week and a half ago on the first 2018 Youngbird release from the island of Molokai to the island of Oahu. And the weather is much better today, so there's a lot less wind. Like I said last time, the winds were over 25 miles per hour. Today they're about 10 miles per hour, and right now it's calm. The visibility also seems to be much better. When I was flying into Molokai this morning, I could see Lanai very clearly, much clearer than I could when I released them last time. So I'm hoping that that helps them even more, that they'll see the island of Oahu across that channel, because it will be clearer. They've already done it. Okay guys, I need you guys to fly back to Oahu, okay? Good luck everybody. Okay, there they go, all 6 of them. That's the direction that they flew last time. That's towards Maui, so that's the wrong direction, that's east. I'm thinking they're going to turn around shortly and fly west towards Oahu. They're still flying the wrong direction. Here they come. Here they come, they're coming back. They're all still together as a flock, but they're just flying around this area for now. Alright, they headed the right direction. So they headed west towards the island of Oahu. I got a good feeling about today. Well, I just got home and I already know I have some really good news to share with you. We released 6 birds in Molokai today, and 2, 4, 6. We have 6 in our loft. And I already know they did really well because my wife was actually outside when they landed. So she saw all 6 birds land. Some of them landed on the stock loft, and that's because there was actually a wild bird that was on their landing board. So sometimes that scares them if there's a wild bird on it. But all of them went in the loft pretty quickly, except for one, and the one that didn't go in the loft is an old bird. But what was interesting is, looking at that old bird on the landing board, you can see it's breathing very heavily. And its wings are hanging, so clearly that bird's not in as good as shape as you can see some of the young birds in the loft. Some of the young birds in the loft look like they're not phased at all with the flight they just did. They're not breathing hard, they're standing upright, they look really good. So at least some of those birds are doing really well in their training, and I'm just really glad that all of them came back at the same time, because that means we're going to get to see the route that all of the birds took. So let's go look at that data. But before I show you the data from today's flight, I wanted to address a few concerns that were left in the comments of my last video. And that last video being the terrible returns I had from a Molokai toss for the 2018 Youngbirds. I had sent 52 Youngbirds on that toss, accompanied by 2 other old birds. And out of those 52 Youngbirds, only 4 returned to Oahu, unfortunately, and we were able to rescue a few more on outer islands. So some of the concerns were if I had prepared them well enough for that Molokai toss. This data on the screen in front of you represents the road training that these birds had received prior to the release today, actually. So prior to me even taking them to the island of Molokai, these young birds had 25 road training tosses. Now I started with close distances to the loft. The first release point was only 2 miles from the loft, and I released them there 3 times. After that, I increased the distance to 9 miles and again did 3 tosses. From there, I increased it 13 miles, did 3 tosses, and then I increased it to 20 miles, did another 3 tosses, and then until I got to the furthest point on the east side of Oahu from my loft, which is 23 miles, and I did 12 tosses from that location. And 2 of those tosses from that furthest location were actually solo tosses, where I took the time to release each bird individually, which took me 2 hours each time I did this because I had so many young birds. But I think that helps them in determining the route home on their own instead of just following a flock. And then in addition to this, they did have one release off the east coast of Oahu while I was on my boat. Unfortunately, this channel has just been so rough, the channel between Oahu and Molokai. I would have liked to take them a few times on the channel on my boat and at further distances closer to Molokai, but it was just not safe. And if you did watch that video, I think it's fairly clear that that was a bad decision even to do it in the first place. Last year, I had a much better release from the channel. It was about 4 or 5 miles. So it was further away from Oahu, and that may have helped the 2017 birds last year, because when I did release the last year's bird from Molokai, all of them returned. I didn't lose any birds. But I hope this just clarifies that, I wasn't trying to be irresponsible and just sending my birds to Molokai without at least attempting to do a really good job in training them beforehand. Unfortunately, I think there was some external factors which prevented the birds from returning from Molokai. Possibly the high winds that day, as well as a little bit of a low visibility, maybe the birds not being able to see Oahu clearly that day. That was something that, didn't dawn on me as being so important. The winds, I did have concerns about that, but I didn't think it would prevent them from crossing the channel, because I have flown birds across the channel in winds like that. The other thing is the visibility. You could still see Oahu, but just not that clearly. And I thought that the birds would be using some sort of magnetic field to orientate themselves and get them in the right direction. However, the more I thought about that, the more I understood that that thinking didn't really work. And I put this in one of the comments in the last video. So I equated maybe the bird's ability to detect a magnetic field to a person with a compass in their hand. So maybe the birds can detect which way north, south, east, west is. But if you put yourself in the place of the bird and you were transported to another location that you're not familiar with, there's nothing in sight that looks familiar to you, and you had a compass in your hands, you would be able to tell me which way north, south, east, west is, but you would have no idea where you were taken and which way will take you back to the loft. So that being said, I really kind of realized this year that the birds need to be able to see something familiar. So in that case, I think the birds need to see the coast of Oahu pretty clearly in order to make that distinction that, in this case, that they're east of Oahu, the island they need to get to. Otherwise, they have no idea where they are. It's not like they have a Garmin GPS in front of them showing them that, oh, I'm on this island, and my loft is on this island, and this is the way I need to go. I think their magnetic abilities is just to orientate which way is a relative north, south, east, west for them. And then another thing that I think really hurt me on that last Molokai toss is that I released them in the middle of the island here in Molokai. Now, my thinking behind that was I wanted the birds to fly up, and then I thought their magnetic ability would put them on the right course back to the loft. But of course, they don't know if they're east-west of the loft, so that's something that I shouldn't have thought. But if it did go the way I thought and they would have headed in the right direction because of their magnetic ability, I thought that they would be at a higher altitude and they would be on a path which would give them some sort of momentum to continue in that direction. Now, why I think it's important to take them to the west side of Molokai, and a lot of people disagree with me about this, is that Since these birds don't already have a magnetic path ingrained in them, backed up by visual cues on how to get to Oahu, these birds that are on Molokai for the first time need visual cues before they can develop that magnetic path, if they have that ability. So the closer you can get them to Oahu, especially since that day was kind of hazy and it was hard to see Oahu, you know, the easier they can see Oahu and make that distinction that they need to go that way. Unfortunately, since I released them here in the midpoint of Molokai, there's actually a mountain ridgeline here, so the birds need to fly relatively high to first see over this mountain ridge to see Oahu in the first place. Put on top of that they couldn't hardly see Oahu because of the haze that day, and then they're not going to fly that high that day because the winds were so strong, really made for a disastrous situation. So you know, either they didn't get high enough to see over this ridgeline to see Oahu, or even if they did get high enough, they couldn't see Oahu because of this increased distance I had taken them, which resulted in them actually going the wrong way and going along the south shoreline of Molokai. With the Skyleader GPS data, it really enlightened me on the mistakes I've made, so I don't have to make them again in the future. One other concern that people had was that my birds were just simply not good quality. Now, I wish I could just blame everything on the birds, but the fact of the matter is that my mentor brings in excellent birds from Europe every single year, plus he has excellent birds that have won races here locally within the state, so that's really not an option for me to complain that I have terrible birds. So it's not that. Now, another question was if these young birds were simply just too young. Maybe I bred too late. I actually bred really early, pretty much as early as you can. So the first round was born the beginning part of January. And the second round was born in February. Now, this is what I really wanted to show you. Now, this is the data from today, our second Molokai toss. And what's really interesting is if you look at this bottom graphic right here, the blue line on this graph depicts speed. So you can see right here it's 0. And what they did is they landed up here in the northwest corner before they made the decision to cross the channel. And then the birds flew on this track to the northwest point of Molokai, and they actually landed right here. And they actually landed for about 13 minutes before taking off again and deciding that they should cross the channel to Oahu. And the simple fact that there was less wind, it sure did look like these birds were flying higher than they were last time. So they're at 193 meters right now. So that's pretty high. And that would allow them to see over this mountain ridge line right here. Plus the visibility was much better today. So maybe once they got to that altitude, they could see Oahu not only over this ridge line, but also because the visibility was clearer. And what was also interesting is they took a similar track to that old bird on that first Molokai toss. They flew north into the wind. Again, the wind in Hawaii, the normal trade wind pattern is from the northeast. So that's kind of interesting. They took a very similar course to that old bird. And then it flew over the northeast tip of Oahu, continued over Kokoed Crater, and did a very good job of just flying a straight line to Diamond Head. And then as soon as they hit the shoreline, they follow the shoreline right back to their loft. And lastly, I can show you the comparison from the data we gained today compared to the first Molokai toss we did. So on the screen, we still have the red and blue, which is today's data. And then we also have the first Molokai toss, which is the yellow and the green. So you can see the green went to Lanai, and that was the young bird that was rescued from Molokai. And then the yellow is the old bird that actually made it back the first day on the first Molokai toss. You can see the birds today really didn't fly around much at all before they made the decision to head towards Oahu, while as the first release, they flew over a great distance, the wrong direction along the south shoreline and then back up to the north. Well, I sure am glad that all 6 birds made it back safely today. Last week when I did my first Molokai toss for the 2018 young bird season, that was a difficult day. I ended up losing 46 of my young birds that day. But what I did do is I uploaded that video, and I want to say a big thank you to everybody that left their comments in that video, whether it was just words of support. I really appreciate it. or it was advice or ideas on what may have happened that day or things I could do differently in the future. It all really helped me to cope with the outcome of that day. And you know, I did learn a lot from it. Unfortunately, it was at the expense of those birds, but you know, there's nothing I can do about that now. Going on into the future, I do have the experience of that day and the knowledge I've gained from that experience, so that's one positive from it. But looking forward in this 2018 young bird season, I do have these 4 birds, young birds, that are doing very well. So what I will do is I'll enter them in the first race for this season, and that race is from the island of Maui, and it's on August 25th. So that's coming up shortly, so make sure you subscribe to see updates on how they're doing in the racing season itself. This is Sean at Aloha Pigeons. Again, I appreciate all of you. Aloha.